I grew up in a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's a very rural area with lots of woods and forests. I never really had any weird experiences until one day when I was 17 years old. My friends and I were driving around, looking for some places to go swimming. We ended up at this abandoned cement factory that was sitting right at the edge of town. The whole thing is surrounded by trees and bushes, so it kind of feels like you're out in the middle of nowhere, even though it's only about 10 minutes outside of town. Anyway, afterwards, I ended up working my shift, which took me really late at night. This is where my story begins. It was a dark night, and I had just driven home from work. As I drove down the long, winding road that leads to my house, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. It looked like an animal of some kind, but it was hard to tell exactly. I mean, there were no streetlights back there. And suddenly, this creature jumped out at me from the trees on either side of the narrow dirt lane. It swiped at my car with its sharp claws, nearly knocking my vehicle off balance with its weight, before disappearing into the woods once more. All I could see for a moment was its glowing eyes, before they blinked out too quickly for me to focus on them any longer. I sped up, and it was now running behind my car, growling the whole time. Once I reached the turnoff that would lead me past the security gate into my house, I floored it. The creature scampered off into the woods, and I stopped seeing it. I couldn't get over how my whole body shook when I saw it lunge at me before jumping back. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel my pulse in my neck. It was so dark that it was all I could do to keep the last glimpse of its glowing eyes imprinted on my memory. I feel like I would never forget those eyes, and the feeling of terror they provoked. I knew about the Dogman before I ever saw it. I had always been part of my family's history, passed down in story from generation to generation. We all grew up hearing the stories from our elders, and as a child, they were just scary stories to tell on a cold winter's night around the fire with hot apple cider in hand. As you get older, though, you come to understand that some of what they're telling, take it for what it is, a cautionary tale. I don't care if you believe me when I say that I saw the Dogman. It made my whole body shake. All I could see were its eyes, which were like a dull glow in the dark, before it disappeared into the woods again. It was hard to make out anything else, but the creature, again, it was very dark. But I know what I saw and felt. When it lunged at me and jumped back, I had never been more scared in my entire life. I grew up in Washington State and have lived there my whole life. Washington is a beautiful state with so much to offer. The mountains, the ocean, rainforests, deserts. The list goes on. I've been lucky enough to explore this amazing place for most of my life, and now that I'm all grown up and ready to start making some decisions about where I want to live permanently, it's a good time to reflect back on what has made me fall in love with Washington. It's such an incredible place, full of beauty and wonder. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. One of my best friends and I decided to go camping in the mountains one summer night. We got a lake, so it was pretty dark by the time we made it to our campsite, which was on the other side of this lake. As soon as we set up camp and began cooking dinner, we heard what sounded like a howling, but coming from across the river. We didn't think much of it until we saw what looked like a huge dog loping around the trees out there, and it was coming towards us. I swear, friend, that this thing had glowing eyes, 2 big orange circles, looking right at me. It then quickly disappeared, and we didn't see it for a while after that. But shortly later, we heard some more noises in the distance. Again, It sounded like a large animal running through the woods. After a few moments, we all began hearing twigs snapping and what sounded like something coming close to our campsite. We all became really scared, trying to have a sense of humor about it. But then we saw something standing next to our tent. It was around 6 foot tall, on 4 legs, with a shaggy, wolf-like head and fur. The creature ran off into the forest before my friend or I could get a better look at it. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Not only did I feel we were going to die, but I couldn't sleep for a long time after. My mind was racing with thoughts of what could have been out there, watching us, waiting. I mean, I've heard of Bigfoot, but this was a creature I never even imagined even existed before. I'm not much of a believer in Bigfoot, but after this sighting, maybe they do exist out there. Maybe other animals like it exist too. The creature really reminded me of a werewolf, even though werewolves don't exist. Even though the word werewolf doesn't really describe what we saw that night, they actually look more like werewolves. I know, a lot of Native American tribes have legends about something they call the Dogman, so maybe it's connected to that. Or maybe they are just animals out there like him, and we don't really know much about them. I've tried doing some research before shooting you this email, but I've only been successful with finding little details. A lot of the stories out there are pretty old, and only include a few details, or they're accompanied by blurry photographs. I'm really interested in finding out more about this creature or Dogman, so I can feel better after my encounter with whatever it was that night. What do you know about them? Anything might help. Your best guess would be a good place to start. Thanks for your time, friend. I'm not sure what is scarier, the stories of people who have seen it, or the fact that I now live in fear of being one of them. The Dogman has been sighting in numerous states throughout North America, and more recently, sightings have been reported near my hometown. It's being described as a werewolf-like creature, about 8 feet tall, amber-colored glowing eyes, and gray to black fur covering its body. This thing sounds terrifying. While I haven't seen one myself, I'm reaching out to you today to share with you my aunt's first-hand encounter she experienced just last summer. In her words, I was driving out my car around early one morning. There were some deer in the road. I slowed down to help them cross. As soon as they cleared the street, I looked ahead and saw a large gray animal come into view. It appeared to be running on 2 legs, and it cleared the road quickly. Then, it turned its head to look back at me. It was this time I noticed it had glowing amber eyes. I lost control of the car in my shock, and luckily was already slowed down. I was so frightened, I lost consciousness for a brief time, until I woke up to find my vehicle badly damaged. After she came to, she found her bumper ripped off and her front end damaged. She also said that there were deep claw marks along the sides of her vehicle. While some may think this sounds like a miscellaneous animal attack, many more are convinced this is the work of a dogman or cryptid of some kind. Similar characteristics, of course. They believe these types of attacks have been happening for a long time, all over North America, but most have just never been reported. It would be nice to hear from others who may have either had similar encounters or know more about the habits of dogmen. Obviously, this left my aunt completely terrified and shaken up. I'm not sure why this creature can't seem to figure out what it wants to do. My aunt says she was unconscious for a brief time after she saw this creature. She woke up to find her car damaged with deep claw marks on the side of the vehicle. One moment, it's breaking into cars and killing people, but now it seems to be more interested in just running them off the road, giving them a warning. It's confusing. It had a perfectly golden opportunity to kill my aunt, but it didn't. Why did it damage the car for? I mean, due to the severity of the damage, it's only natural to assume it was caused by this creature. Anyway, you're the expert here. What are your thoughts on this crazy story? By the way, I 100% believe my aunt. She is very truthful and never really ever makes up stories. She's a very honest person. This was the first time that she had seen this Dogman, but she is certain it was the creature. For one thing, she was completely conscious when the sighting occurred. Also, several other people have reported seeing this Dogman over the past few years. It's been seen in a number of locations all across the country, and most recently, reports are coming out of Michigan. Based on my research, I've found that many people who report encounters with this creature often give very accurate descriptions of it. They also tend to describe how it specifically targets humans. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there have been numerous attacks where the perpetrator has claimed to be the Dogman. This is especially true when dogs are involved, as it seems like the Dogman takes great pleasure in chasing them down before ripping them apart. These creatures are far more volatile than bears. Anyway, get back to me. Let me know what you think of her story. Thank you for taking your time. It's a very common myth that people who have seen the Dogman are considered crazy. However, it's not always easy to tell what's real and what isn't anymore. People are seeing things all around the country, now with their own eyes more than ever, so there must be something to the story. It might sound unbelievable at first, but you can't deny these stories when they're coming from such reliable sources. There were even sightings recorded by a police officer back in 2010 and in 2013. An American Indian tribe had multiple reports of being chased by this large wolf-like creature. What do you think? My grandmother was also an American Indian who belonged to the same tribe. For reasons I'm not going to name the tribe. She and many of the fellow tribesmen saw the same strange wolf-like creature during their hunting trips at nighttime. Their claim was that this animal was roughly 9 feet tall, walked around on 4 legs, and had a face like a fierce wolf with glowing red eyes. It seemed to be stalking them, and they ran as fast as they could to get back to their camp. The next day, when they looked for tracks, they found nothing, but it still gave them goosebumps every time they told their stories. Another story from my grandmother back in the day tells of a disturbing find. 2 young boys who had seen something big and upright in the woods at night. They stumbled out into their front lawn, told their parents about it. The next day, they took their dad back to the place where they saw it, and he discovered an 18-inch long paw print. Something was out there watching them, but what? Then, there was a younger couple, a boyfriend-girlfriend, who reported seeing something like a werewolf coming out of the forest towards them, and it began to growl. They ran inside, but this thing had pressed its face up against their window, watching them for a while. They described it as really scary and grotesque looking. I talked to a few people who live in or around the Manistee area, and they said they've seen things like this before. One of them was an officer who caught something on video camera not long ago, but never made it public. There is another man from North Carolina whose father was also a policeman there. He informed me that his father had a close encounter at nighttime with this strange wolf creature back in 1979, and even now, after so many years have passed, he still gets nervous when it comes to talking about what happened. He said that his father was driving home late one night when he saw a tall figure standing on two legs beside the road ahead of him. He pulled over, being curious, but suddenly, this creature dropped down on all fours, running into the woods. He said its fur covered its entire body, which was brown-reddish, a very wolfish face, glowing eyes, and stood roughly 9 to 10 feet tall, a behemoth of a creature. I think there is definitely something going on here. What are your thoughts?